Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's album study night, sort of. Kind of album studies, album retrospective. Everybody's heard about this brand new tour that just started. The band is called Beat. Of course, in the band, we have Adrian Belew, Tony Levin from King Crimson. We've got Steve Vai on guitar from A Million Things in the Steve Vai Band, and Danny Carey from Tool. They're out playing songs from these three albums: King Crimson, Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair, plus maybe some other assorted Crimson stuff. Let me introduce the crew. We're going to talk about these albums. Eric Porter's in the house. Ken Golden is here. Chad Hutchinson is here. And he's back in Chicago. Luis Nasser is here as well. What's up, gentlemen?
Hey, good evening. Good evening.
We're talking King Crimson. I think we're all pretty excited to go see this tour and rediscover some of these songs from these albums again. In fact, we have been spending a lot of time with them over the last 2 weeks and leading up to this episode. And normally what we do on our album study shows is we pick one album, we kind of dissect it and everything like that. Today, what we're going to do is kind of talk about these three albums and how they fit in the King Crimson catalog, and how they work from a perspective of prog rock music in the early 80s, and how we think that the Beat Band is going to interpret these live on stage, because I think that's the really interesting part of this whole thing. So let's just start with one of us here. Eric, I'm going to go down to you here.
Sure.
Did you kind of get into these as they came out? Did you discover these later on, and did you go for one first over the other? How did you kind of come across these three?
I was just a little late. It was I started college in, I want to say, the fall of '84, and a guy I met in college that we ended up putting a band together was the guy that kind of introduced me into prog as a whole. Outside of, everyone had a Yes album or something like that, getting deeper. And I remember, we've talked about this before on the show, but he gave me a mixtape of a bunch of different bands, and Model Man was one of the songs on the tape. So that might have been the first thing I ever heard. I don't remember hearing them on the radio. I know they had a video, I think they had a video for Heartbeat and maybe something else, but I don't ever remember seeing it. So that was my introduction. And I remember hearing that, and that stood out to me. Not really knowing what King Crimson was. That's probably the first I heard King Crimson, I think, unless I heard something on the radio like Court of the Crimson King, which I just don't remember hearing Crimson ever on the radio. So I think the 80s band was my kind of introduction to the band, and then work backwards. And I love this stuff. I'm really excited about the show. I've gone out and watched a few of the clips that are on YouTube already. I honestly can't wait. And I think hearing this, the 80s version of Crimson, we were talking before the show, and Luis mentioned it's one of his favorite versions of the band. I absolutely adore the guitar work on this stuff. I wish I could sit in a studio and bring all the faders down and listen to Fripp, and then bring Fripp down and listen to Blue. It's hard sometimes to hear everything that's going on between Fripp, Levin, and Belew. You kind of know whose sound is whose, but
especially on this one, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be a dream for me, to get to sit in a studio and just take the faders and move things down and listen to, I'm sure these guys like Vi learning Robert's parts. I'm assuming, he might have taken those masters and just, I'm going to listen to Fripp and hear what he's doing. So,
Eric, it's funny you say that. Is it Rhett Davies that produced the first one? Is that right?
yes.
Yeah.
Apparently, when he first got in the studio with them, they were well rehearsed because they went out and did shows as Discipline. He actually did that. He had to move faders up and down to figure out what the hell was going on, because there was so much noise, noise in a good way, but he just couldn't figure out who was doing what between the stick and the guitar and Fripp.
Right. But I don't know. I've obviously gone back. We bought the tickets months ago, but I've obviously gone back, and I've been listening to these a lot, prepping for the show, this show and the show we're going to see. And I know we're kind of going to go round and round, so I don't want to take up a lot of time, but This to me is a 5-star. I love that record. If I'm gonna, if this wasn't coming out and I said I want to hear some 80s Crimson, I'm always pulling out Discipline. And that's just, I don't know why, but that one to me just is perfect. So,
Do you think from like album to album, the quality kind of dipped a little bit, or was the sound just changing? Because
for me, and I'm very interested to hear what other people have to say, because for me, that's my favorite record. I think this will be fun to kind of hear what everyone has to say. I think Neil, Jack, and Me is my absolute favorite song from this era of the band. I don't know what it is about that song, but it crushes me every time I hear it. I find Three of a Perfect Pair a little too, the second side. I think the first side's terrific. The second side to me gets a little too meandering, a little too, whether it's improv or experimental. I don't know. That one kind of fades for me. And I always think about like Neurotica and Thela Hungingit are kind of that same. Thela Hungingit to me is perfect. And then they do Neurotica, and I'm like, yeah, it worked the first time. The second time, it's like, it was a great idea. It's a great thing, but it's one of those things, only do it once. I don't know why, but Neurotica kind of bugs me because I just always feel like it's just a little kind of a cop of Thela Hungingit, which I think is just absolutely perfect. But that's kind of my quick review of all three of them. But yeah, I would say they go in order for me. I'd go Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair.
So Ken, you probably were into the band before the rest of us.
Yeah.
So how much of a surprise was it for you in 1980 to see a reformation of King Crimson and a completely different lineup, only Bill Bruford and Fripp returning from the previous one and playing music that sounded nothing like the last thing we heard from them with the Red album?
I mean, I was following it, you gotta remember, like, it's in the late 70s, Fripp had moved to New York, and I'm living in New York. So he was doing Frippatronics shows. He was popping up at Max's and CBGB's. He was playing a lot with Blondie and Walter Stedding and all kinds of people. So he was kind of immersed in the whole New York punk scene. And then he started, he did the Gabriel albums and tours and popping up with Talking Heads. So I was following that whole thing. So I didn't know what to expect, but you also got to remember 1980, 1981, it wasn't a hell of a lot of prog going on. It was slim pickings, we got to see shows here and there, but all the dinosaur bands, I mean, they hit shit the bed. I mean, Yes was done, was pretty much done. Pink Floyd was kind of done. ELP certainly was done. So, the idea of a new King Crimson, whatever it was going to be, was incredible. I remember we saw Fripp do what was it? Oh, he had the League of Crafty Guitars, but he had what is it? The dance band, the one with Sarah Lee. Why am I forgetting the name? Um, uh, the League of Gentlemen.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I went to that came before, and I saw the League of Gentlemen, and then Fripp did the solo album. He did Exposure. So I mean, I was ready, and when when that album came out, when Discipline came out, I was following it in Melody Maker. I saw they reformed. They were going out playing shows as Discipline. Man, I was happier than a kid, like a 12-year-old that just figured out what to do with his right hand. I mean, it was awesome. And for me, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that Discipline, for me, was the best progressive rock album of the 80s. There were a lot of great prog rock albums in the 80s. We could talk about Permanent Waves or, Clutching at Straws or Script for a Jester's Gear or something like that. Discipline, for me, was a complete reinvention of progressive rock. There was nothing like it before. Its roots of that band and that album were rooted, I think, in the New York scene. You hear a lot of Talking Heads, both, Fripp played on Izimbra on Fear of Music. Adrian Belew played on Remain in Light. He toured with Talking Heads. Those two guitarists, they come together and they created something that was unlike it had the King Crimson ethos, but it didn't sound like King Crimson. Tony Levin, think about like, you think about Levin. Levin was like a technician. He was this guy could play anything with anybody. He was a very different, I think, a very different player than John Wetton.
Yeah.
A great rock bass player, but Tony Levin was a guy could play jazz. I mean, he could do absolutely anything. And then you have Bruford, who I think by the time of Discipline, I think he had upped his game. And I think it was a band that was totally into it, had that King Crimson ethos of experimentation. You had these two guitar players who were completely different. I mean, totally different styles. The entire album and the whole thing about the band is contrast. You had the precision of Fripp's guitar playing, and you had Adrian's guitar, which was crazy. I mean, it was, if you saw what Adrian was doing, I mean, it was absolutely bonkers. I mean, this guy was like beating the shit out of his guitar. He literally punching his guitar and getting feedback from his amps. It was completely different than Fripp's, guitar lines, which were like laser beams. And then you had the gamelan influence that they were using, all these different polyrhythms. You had the two guitar players. They were both playing at the time, and I saw them 5 times in the 80s, and they were both using the Roland GR 300 guitar synthesizer, and Fripp had pretty much stopped using the Les Paul at that point, and Levin was playing the stick. Who the hell was playing the stick other than Emmett Chapman? We saw him and we're like, what the hell is that thing, right? But it was adding it was adding this percussive element that was playing off of Bruford, plus he was, it was adding like all these funky bass lines. Bruford was playing an acoustic kit, and he was playing with speed and precision that you didn't hear him play with before. I don't think, not to my ears. You listen to what's going on there, and it's just, I think it's just an incredible album. I find that, I don't want to break it down track by track, but there are a couple of highlights for me. Fela and Jinjit I think is just great tune. I didn't know what it was. I just found out, that it was an anagram for heat in the jungle. I didn't even realize it. So, and then my favorite track on the album is The Sheltering Sky. And I remember seeing them doing that live, and Fripp's playing the guitar synthesizer, and it's kind of mellow, and but it's intricate. It's got all this really cool shit going on. And then Fripp, he just plays this just killer solo on it. And the other thing I should say about this band was, as good as these albums are, and they're all great records, they were even better to see this material done live, because they would stretch out. King Crimson was one of the very few British bands. We talked about this, I think, a long time ago. King Crimson was one of the very few British bands that would do improv. You go see Yes, pretty much you're seeing the exact same guitar lines, the exact, same Rick Wakeman solo every night, just more or less, there wasn't much variation. With Crimson were known for doing improvs. We've got these great box sets with all this great improv stuff on it, right? And this band was no different. By the time I saw them at Stony Brook in '82, they had started this band actually started doing improv. Neurotica was originally called Manhattan, and they would stretch that out, and everything, they would just blow everything. They would just kind of blow everything up. And it was kind of funny because seeing them, these guys were having a great time. By the end of that tour, it was very different than the beginning of the tour. I mean, you would see Robert laugh. Adrian was cracking jokes. I mean, he was doing Art Carney honeymooners impersonations on stage. It was a riot.
After the King Crimson show? Nah.
Yeah, right. I mean, right. I mean, I mean, it was, yeah, it was funny. And then, and then, so then the summer of '82, Beat came along, and I like Beat just fine. But for me, it's kind of like a rehash of Discipline. It doesn't, I don't feel that it breaks any new ground. I kind of musically, I feel like it's a slight step back from Discipline. I think the high points are as high as anything on Discipline, but the low points are perhaps a bit lower. I like Two Hands. To me, that was like limp wristed shit. I wasn't, that wasn't like a great tune. I thought like Requiem, I thought was a great way to end the album. It starts out with Frippatronics, and then I'm thinking, well, they're gonna end the album with like Frippatronics piece, but then the bass comes in, the stick, and then the entire band comes in and they kind of wreak havoc at the end. I thought it was really, really cool. Saw them again in '84. If you were in New York at Pier 84, you saw them on. They were a perfect pair. It's a very different record. I feel like as you listen to this album, you could hear a lot of tension. I think there was tension within the band at that point. I would expect that there was probably some pressure for them to come up with a hit single. Asia had broken through, and Yes, we're breaking through. Yet the first side is mostly vocals. That's kind of like Adrian's side. They're nice songs. There's some good stuff there. All the weird shit's on side two. For me, I'm gonna go anti-Eric here. For me, all the really cool shit's on side two. Side one ends with that with what the hell was it called? New Ages. That was kind of cool. But Industry, Dig Me, No Warning was cool. Lark's Tongue and Aspect Part 3. I thought that was awesome. Also, as you listen to this record, the production is very different from the others. Bob Clearmountain mixed this album. Listen to Bill's drums. Bill's drums are kind of recessed. There's more space around Bill's drums. You listen to Discipline and Beat. You listen very immediate, man. And like I said, there's that real precision that I feel is kind of lost a bit. But
there's less of a bite on the guitars too, I find, on this album.
Yeah. But the weird thing is that as I listen to the album, while it doesn't quite have that precision, and it's all relative, I kind of like the way the album sounds. It has this kind of expansive feel to it. Yeah, I mean, it was like Sleepless was like the tune that was obviously going to be the attempt at a single. I know they had New York DJ Francois Kevorkian. He did a remix of it. I don't think it ever caught on anywhere. And it was just this album of extremes. You had the commercial side, and then you had this kind of really kind of weird, fucked up side. I mean, Industry, weird, have some weird shit,
But isn't side two the one that ends with Lark's Part 3?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's great.
That is a masterpiece.
It's great. Yeah. Lark's on Part 3 is fantastic. And it kind of ties in with the old incarnation of the band, the previous incarnation. And, it kind of reminds you, this is King Crimson, yeah, by itself, you'd say, yeah, this is a great album. But man, it's got some big shoes to fill, so for me, it's a bit of a letdown. As I said, for me, Discipline that's the one. Beat, fine out. One last thing I want to say, Eric, you mentioned your friend made you a mixtape.
Yes.
I just say, typically when somebody makes somebody a mixtape, it's usually a sign of affection. So, you might want to just think back on that. So you might have
I think I'm good with it, Ken, but
I had a feeling that was coming.
You've come to grips with it over the years. Okay, that's cool, man. That's cool.
It's all good.
Just don't tell your wife. That's all.
As our resident Rush fanatic here, do you see any similarities with kind of the way this new incarnation of Crimson tackled the beginnings of a new decade, musically speaking, kind of like Rush did at the beginning of the '80s?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, in a slightly different sense where has the Talking Heads influence. You could say Rush has the big Police influence, and the Police were huge right around this same time. Zenyatta Madada and Ghost of the Machine were massive albums, and what Andy Summers was doing on guitar was a huge influence on Alex Lifeson for Signals, especially Grace Under Pressure, Power Windows. And you can see the same thing here with Adrian's work on Talking Heads. Interestingly enough, a friend of mine brought over was the More Songs of Buildings and Food. Is that the right title? Talking Heads. I'd never actually heard that before, and I enjoyed it a lot. But I really could hear, you really do hear that Talking Heads influence in, well, let's just start at the beginning in the Discipline album, and then obviously continued. But it was more, there was more similarities there than just an influence, which surprised me. But that doesn't take away from the uniqueness, like Ken said, of what this band became with the sounds that they were using, the interlocking instruments that they were playing. It's just, is and never was anything quite like this again. And for Crimson fans at that time, had to be a shock to the system. But clearly, a lot of people latched onto it. Ken saying it, Discipline's one of his favorites. It's a great album. There's no question about it.
I don't understand it within us and a lot of prog fans, the extreme dislike for Talking Heads. I really don't quite
That's
get it.
because they're stupid.
You think they're stupid?
I think they're completely stupid. I think they dislike it without having heard it.
Yeah, I mean,
I've also heard that some people think that the record companies, for lack of a better theory, cherry picked the most commercial stuff, and that's what most people know. But I think a lot of the more interesting stuff I've heard are not the radio hits.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
So
The people who trash the Talking Heads haven't really heard the albums.
right. If you
They
listen
base their
to,
judgment on a couple of radio hits, and that's
Sure.
all we know.
If
When
you
in
listen-
reality, it's a great catalog.
if you listen to something like Remain in Light,
Yeah.
it's like a precursor to Discipline in a sense. You can hear the continuity, is all I'm saying. I mean, David Byrne, he's an acquired taste as a vocalist, just like Adrian is an acquired taste as a vocalist. But musically, if you listen to what Adrian is destroying on Remain in Light, you listen to what he does on The Great Curve, it's insane. I mean, the playing, they were great players. And then if you can, go on HBO or whatever, Max or whatever the hell it's called these days, and watch Stop Making Sense.
It's
And
a great documentary. I agree.
It's
Totally endorse it. It's great.
extraordinary. And
Yeah.
to see the complexity of what was going on, they had Bernie Worrell, they had 2 keyboard players, they had all these singers, percussionists. There was so much shit going on. And it's, and like they would do Zimbra. Zimbra is a King Crimson tune. There's no difference. So I'm really surprised when we talk to prog fans and the dislike for Talking Heads. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
I have interrogated a few. They don't know the catalog.
Yeah.
That's why I said what I said at Orion.
Yeah, they know
They just know the
Psycho.
radio tunes and those couple of videos on MTV.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
they thought, well, that's everything, right?
They know Psycho Killer, and so they hate Talking
or
Heads.
Once in a Lifetime, Burning Down the House. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but man, great. Those later albums are phenomenal. You should explore Fear of Music and Remain in Light, and I think you'll be rewarded. And you'll hear the connection. I think it'll give you a better understanding of what's going on with Exposure and Discipline.
And we haven't even mentioned it, but Ballou played with Zappa.
Yeah.
I don't think anything is going to prepare you for the madness that is Robert Fripp more than playing with Frank Zappa right before then. So that had to have gotten him ready to walk into this situation, you would think.
Oh, but Ballou also played with Bowie, who's
Yeah.
very
Both of
underrated.
them did.
His
Both of them.
music is very
Right.
complex. Ballou is top level musician by any metric. Yeah. So
Let me show a little solidarity with my brother Eric, and say that the first time I really got to dive into King Crimson was a friend of mine in college made me a King Crimson mixtape. We were talking about music one day, and I hadn't, I had known the name. I had lots of Yes and Rush and all that stuff, right? The common stuff. But I hadn't taken that step to get into King Crimson. And he's like, well, I've got all of it. Let me get you a sampling. So, all right. So he gives me this tape, and it's a mixture from the beginning, from 69 to 84. So that we're talking, this is probably 1990, I guess. And so when you mix in things like Court of the Crimson King with Indiscipline or Thela and Gingy, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I never distinctly remember the first time I heard Thela and Gingy going, what the fuck? And I didn't get it. I didn't like it on first listen.
No Mellotrons there, right?
No. And I went back to this mixtape because it was interesting. I felt like there was something there I needed to latch onto. And eventually I started to get into these songs, across the board, but especially the stuff from Discipline. And I'm sure there were things like Sleepless and Three of a Perfect Pair on there. Not as much from Beat, because when I finally got Beat, I didn't know a lot of it. But so that was my intro as well. I ended up getting the Great Deceiver box set for Christmas one year, so I dove in there. But I agree with Eric. Actually, Ken kind of said the same thing. In the order of release is the order that I like them, and I think they're quality. Discipline's a stone cold classic album. Beat's still solid. Like Ken said, Two Hands is okay. A lot of the rest of it's really good. I love like Neurotica, Indiscipline, Thela and Gingy, all those sort of frantic things that maybe a little rehashy. I just think they're all a lot of fun. And then you get to Three of a Perfect Pair, which starts off with such a great song. I mean, the title track's great. Sleepless is great. Nuages is okay. Like I said, Dig Me doesn't do a lot for me. Industry's kind of cool. The fact that A Lark's Tongues Part 3 was even on here was pretty amazing. I love the first half of it. It just cooks. And then it turns a corner and kind of does sort of that, I don't want to, don't take this the wrong way, but more of like a plotting outro kind of thing. And it hit me later on. It reminds me a little bit of the coda to Vroom Vroom, the way it sort of steps through. Don't know if that's any sort of influence on itself, but it kind of hit me the other day that there's a similarity there. Maybe that's a continuation to the Thrack band, maybe not, but three great albums. I've got a friend who was the guy was over here the other night playing Talking Heads. I told him I've got to play Discipline for him, and I think it's going to melt his brain. I can't wait to do it.
So this just came out. It's called Sheltering Skies. This was the soundtrack to a video that came out. It's from the '82 tour, Frasier's France, and this is the first time it's come out on CD and vinyl, of course.
I saw that in the store the other day on vinyl.
You want to hear what this band could do live, man.
Yeah, they were pretty fearsome, but I think you could probably say that about almost every lineup in this band. But yeah.
But there was something very magical about that. And once you started adding all the other guys, I mean, Trey Gunn was great, and Pat Mastelotto, all those guys, it's great. But when it was just these four guys, there was something very special about it. I saw the
uncluttered arrangement, arguably all of them at the peak of their musical powers, right?
Yeah, that was it. I mean,
it was something to prove too.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the double trio and everything after that. I saw some of the, the project shows and stuff. The quartet for this material, that was the shit, man. That was.
So Lewis, we know you're a huge fan of these three records, and probably your favorite lineup of all of the King Crimson lineups. I mean, what do these three albums mean to you today, and what did they mean to you when you first heard them all those years ago?
Well, let me just go retroactively. I'll talk about today, because my first contact with these records was weird. I heard them at the English school that I went to, and the art teacher would play them for me while I was drawing or doing whatever while I was in detention. And he was a guy that helped me hear a lot of music that was not available to me in the bootlegs that I could afford. So my first contact was with Beat. And I thought Beat was essentially perfect. Like that it dug its way into my brain. But then when I heard Discipline, that record is catching lightning in a bottle. And frankly, it's a little bit unfair to say, well, this is the standard and now everything must measure up to that, because it's never going to happen. You also got to remember, these guys were on a path toward innovation. I think that a lot of what you hear, more than, I mean, yes, it rocks hard and it doesn't have the synthiness. Although they do play guitar synths, it doesn't sound like 80s synth pop. But a lot of these songs are pop songs. And that's because of Adrian Belew. Yeah. Adrian Belew is a guy that can play polyrhythmic guitar lines and sing a Beatles-like melody. And he makes them work. So I think these records are phenomenal. And they had that task upon themselves. You know, they were primarily trying to innovate. So it was important for them to really try not to repeat themselves too much. Which is why I think the three records, yes, there is a commonality of idiom, but they do go a little bit differently. I mean, the title track with Three of a Perfect Pair is as good as anything on Discipline. It has that kind of dynamic and that speed. But the other tunes, truly, I think, were made to shine on the stage. The studio, I mean, Industry, or I don't know, you know, take your pick from that record. I mean, Industry, Nuages, and one about the clouds. Those songs, they're not, what you hear on the record is not what you hear when you hear the live recordings. So those were ideas that they were playing with, but that they were intended to always evolve. And usually when you record stuff like that, the record never really does it justice, because it hasn't really, it's not intended to be a snapshot. It's intended to be of the moment of the gig. And for that reason, I don't judge that album harshly at all. I think it's just misunderstood. There's a lot of innovation in other areas too. A lot of these records don't have hi-hats. Part of the precision you hear with the playing is there's a very, for lack of a better word, disciplined use of cymbals. And because cymbals bleed everywhere when you're recording, it's a problem, right? Not if you're fucking Keith Moon, that's just your sound, but in general, it's a problem. And you don't have that problem here. The electronic drums allow you to finally have full separation of sound. But if you wanted some of the acoustic tones, then you had to figure out a way to make it so that they would not muddy up the mix. And that is what Bruford is doing there. And Bruford is unlike any other drummer in that regard. I mean, Pat Mastelotto is a monstrous drummer and a good friend, but he's not Bill Bruford, and he'll be the first to tell you, right? So all of these records, yes, they have the stick, which nobody had heard before, and I can say from experience, having joined a band like Luz Herrera, that they used to have a stick player, not a bassist. You approach it completely different. The fingering, the hand positions, the way you play those lines on a stick can be very comfortable, and it's a bitch and a half to play it on bass. So it's just the difference in the instrument gives you a difference in the lines and the intervals that you're using as you play. And that's what you hear. I mean, Tony Levin is actually having a lot of fun doing things that he wouldn't normally be able to do on a bass. And of course, he also plays the bass, but you want to play Elephant Talk on a bass guitar? Good luck. That's all I will tell you. It's not impossible, but it's going to take a lot of practice. And I just grew up on those records. So for me, they're a standard of excellence that is very hard to match. And also there is I put it up on the chat for this, but there is a book of transcriptions that you can purchase. It's the Discipline Era transcription that has everything, including the drums, everything.
Well, apparently the beat band has been Vi and Danny Carey have been looking at that.
Those guys used that to prep for this tour. And that's the thing. Unlike the old King Crimson, here you have true polymetric music. I mean, Bellew is in one time signature, Fripp is in another, Levin is in another, and that's part of the organized chaos. Every now and then they all get back together, but you have to hold it in, and it's a discipline. You know, again, I'm not trying to be funny, but when you play some of these songs, you really have to do something which you should never do as a musician, which is to not listen to the other guys. You just have to play your part and fucking play it right and not fuck it up, because you need to arrive at a point in time in the one. And they do all this stuff with joy. It's extremely musical. It's catchy. I mean, every song has got a bunch of earworms. So I don't know what more can you ask. Right? They never matched this again, ever. Everything that happened after was, I don't think they were trying. I think this had its moment, and then they had to decide, well, what are we going to do to reinvent ourselves yet again?
Yeah.
Perhaps the subsequent reinventions were not as successful. But I would say these three records, to me, are the standard. If you really want to learn how to be better at your instrument, learn these songs.
So, Luis, would you say that the later incarnation of the band, they needed 3 drummers to do what Bill was doing by himself?
No, because the 3 drummers it's an orchestrated mayhem. So they're playing different things.
Yeah.
Like Gavin Harrison is playing a solo on his drums during 21st Century Schizoid Man that's actually melodic. Like he's riffing on the vocal melody with the right part of his body, and then he's doing all kinds of other crazy shit with the left. So these guys and the other 2 dudes are doing other things. So what they did was very different, because precisely in these 3 albums, it was almost like the Miles Davis kind of blue mentality. The space is just as important as the sounds. And the rests and the interlocking, the beats that are created when you have this polymetric lines that interweave, that's the groove. And in my view, Bruford is the ultimate master of finding that groove and playing it for you, showing it to you. So what all the instruments are doing, Bruford like just foreshadows it with what he's doing. And it's a really beautiful thing. But this is not stuff that I really grasped when I was a kid and I heard it the first time. My first reaction was pretty much, what the fuck is this? It's cool, but I don't really I mean, I was into The Who, man. I was into Sabbath, into Iron Maiden, right? This was very different. Like I got into many altercations just to be able to be the first in line to buy Number of the Beast and things like that. This is a different animal. But it was undeniable. This is what I will say, to me. It was undeniably something that required your full attention. And now I'm 55 years old, and I like it way more than I ever did back then. And one of the things I really appreciated about this assignment is that it forced me to re-listen to these albums and resist the temptation of breaking them down into the parts, right? To really just listen to the music. And the music is that. This is my take on it. It is all the complexity rhythmically of prog rock with all the catchiness of pop.
Yep.
This is how I would describe this era of the band. And this is why they were so fucking powerful. Because they could do it all.
These albums aged very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
They have.
And that's another thing. When I play these albums for my students at Columbia, to my amazement, a few of them already know them.
That's good.
Great. And the people who don't know them do like them. Like they do take note and they look it up on their phone and they're gonna steal it or listen to it on Spotify or whatever, but it's enough that they want to get it into their life.
And I think Lewis as like say as musically challenging as Discipline, like I'll use this album as an example, as challenging as this is and out there as this is from a arrangement perspective, I would think that your students or anybody who doesn't know who King Crimson is today would find this way more enjoyable than say Islands or Lizard,
Absolutely.
right? Or even like Starless and
Lark.
Violet,
Lark's done,
Right.
and those are classics. I also play some of those albums from them. There is less traction there.
Yeah.
And someone who'd never heard it before, I'd be interested to see when they thought these were done. Like, do you think somebody'd say, "Oh, this was from 1981"? To me, it doesn't. It doesn't.
When I
sound
tell them
that
that
weird.
when I tell them, they're always surprised.
Yeah.
Because they do sound fresh.
Yep.
And that is the beauty. That's how you know that this is timeless.
Yeah.
I can play it in 2024 and it's just as relevant as in 1984. And I mean, I don't know what else can I say about these records? They're essential. I think people who watch these shows and only care about a limited part of the 70s of King Crimson, you're really missing out. And if you only like the 90s and 2000s of King Crimson, that's also very cool, but it's different. This is unique. And I think it's a perfect vehicle for people who don't like prog to actually start listening to music that demands your brain to do a little bit more work without asking it to sacrifice any of the ass shaking and the rhythm and the singing of the melody, because it's all there.
I don't know, Luis. It's no Prozac blues.
There's no Prozac blues. Well, then again, I don't think there was Prozac when these records were made. That was a latter day invention. But yeah, I love them. I absolutely love these records. I think these four guys really, really did something special. And we're lucky that we lived in an era where we could live through it more or less at the time it happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's something we haven't mentioned, and I mean, it's not a huge thing. Well, maybe it is a huge thing to some people. It is such a cool looking trilogy of albums with the bright colors.
Yeah.
I mean, the artwork is simple. It's clean. I don't know. They're pretty. They just look nice. Where's the
But I think that's no accident. I think
no,
that
not at all.
they were going for that aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
it's
the
perfect.
juiciest one is Discipline. And it
Yeah,
harkens back to that Celtic kind of idea. There's a simple shape, but there's a lot of structure behind it.
Mhm.
After that, they just take it for granted. Okay, we're up and about. And now here comes our next our next improvement or our next development of these ideas. And yeah, they're not equal because the very first one is just such a mind fuck. But you're expecting more of the same. You kind of want Discipline Part 2. But I am happy they didn't do that because we have 3 records that are sufficiently close that they belong together, but sufficiently different that they each have their identity. They each have a thing to say. They each have a function. And I love them. To me, there are no throwaway tracks. Some of the instrumental ones don't really work that well for an album, but whenever you hear versions of them live,
It comes alive.
they're great. So, yeah, I love them.
Hey, Ken, how does that new release compare to Absent Lovers?
I don't remember Absent Lovers to be honest. Well,
Absent Lovers is really good.
Yeah.
Yes.
I listened to the vinyl version of this. I thought it sounded, thought it sounded okay.
Absent Lovers is a great.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Be interesting to hear that.
Look at Pete flexing with that King Crimson shirt tonight.
He's doing the right thing,
Nice.
man.
Great looking shirt.
Mine does not fit anymore.
No, well, I didn't get this that long. I bought this from the band like, I don't know, 3 years ago or something
Yeah.
like that. So I haven't gained too much weight since then, so I'm okay.
I think I washed a few cars with mine.
I don't want a beach shirt.
Yeah, right. Why not?
The Beat album is really beautiful looking, in my opinion. It's the one I like the
I
most.
have this too.
Yeah.
So to kind of take us all out, and I didn't tell the guys we were going to do this, but I'll put them on the spot. Real quick, if everybody can kind of think of what your favorite track is from each of these 3 albums. We'll go to Eric first. So what's your favorite song from Discipline?
Discipline, you're killing me. I gotta go Elephant Talk just because I love what Blue does in that. But I think, you know, we could talk about these all day. Mate Kudasai is absolutely beautiful. Frame by frame is killer. Beat, I already said Neil Jack and Me without question. And I love the bass intro for Sleepless, so I got to go with Sleepless for 3 of a Perfect Pair.
Can't go wrong with any of those. Ken?
It's got to be Sheltering Sky. Sartori and Tangier, I love that, and that was just so amazing live. And then Lark Song Part 3.
Those are all good. Chad?
Guess he went with the instrumentals.
Boy, this is not easy.
No.
I mean, Elephant Talk's great. I might have to go with Discipline. Beat. Man. I do like Neurotica. I think that's fun, but yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go Neurotica on that. And I'm gonna go 3 of a Perfect Pair. Those Sleepless is a close second.
Okay. Lewis?
This is like you kicked me square in the nuts.
I just came up with this like 2 minutes ago. I wasn't planning.
Yeah, this is fine. This is fine. Look, the one that brings me the most joy when I think about it without having to dissect anything is from Discipline. I would have to pick either Frame by Frame or Thela Hunjinji. Either one of those 2 is fucking awesome. From Beat, Neil and Jack and Me is hard to beat. But honestly, I love Requiem. And The Howler is pretty fucking badass. And from 3 of a Perfect Pair, obviously the title track is, you know, is great. And Larks Part 3 is, those would be like the obvious, you know, you can't go wrong with those. But again, I don't really think of these as individual tracks. To me, these are the kind of records that you play them start to finish. Like every bit counts. And I like the way they were sequenced. Maybe I just grew used to them. I don't know if there's a better sequencing, but I love them.
There was a different sequencing before recording the album, I think. But
It'll be interesting to see Beat how they approach this. I mean, I watched the videos, you know,
I'm trying to avoid those.
I haven't watched any of it.
I watched
I
some,
don't want to.
No?
Nope.
I watched a little. I
No.
watched a few clips.
I got
I
a
don't wanna
kick
see
out of
shit.
watching them.
I
I
want to
don't
be
want to.
mind
I don't want
blown.
the sound
from
road by
get-go.
me.
I watched it because I got into an argument with Edgar Arellin, our sound engineer and a member of Luz Herrera. He was saying that there was no fucking way this would be good because he heard and watched some Tool videos and decided there was no way that drummer would be able to play these songs with the restraint they required.
Andy's really good. Come on. Yeah.
Monster.
He's really good, but he has a style, right?
Yeah.
And one thing you do learn when you work with different drummers is that drummers love their fucking cymbals. And the noisier, the better. And whoever invented the China cymbal needs a punch in the balls. But they all have these, and they're all problematic. So he thought they weren't going to do it. So when the first clip came out of that San Jose, I watched a couple of tracks. And I was very happy to see what Danny did. The dude.
Listen, Bill is touring again, playing. So if Danny gets bored,
Yeah. So
I wonder if Bill
like
would
to
sit
say
in
that-
like a show here and there, or just a surprise visit.
wouldn't that be great? If they would set up two
Right.
kits one night, that would be amazing.
Hey, Pete, you didn't get a question. Let me ask you a quick question.
Yes.
What do you think of the fact that they actually went out using the name Discipline and then decided to then use King Crimson?
Necessity. Because I
Yeah.
think going out as Discipline, that name carries no weight at all, but King Crimson does.
Okay.
I mean, we've seen that happen how many times in the history of rock and roll, right? Where you get like the remnants of a band, they go and they form a new lineup and they want to go out as a new name, and the record label's like, you got to go out. I mean, Yes is a perfect example, right?
There's a lot of truth to that. I was looking at the King Crimson biography, the one that's like 9,000 pages. I was looking at that last night, and that's essentially what it came down to.
Marketing.
And like Ken said, they had the ethos. They knew they once they get out and play it as Discipline, they feel like Fripp was sort of like testing to see if the band had that thing that was King Crimson, and then he was much more comfortable with saying, "Yep, this is what. Let's change the name."
Hey,
But yeah,
we
it's
haven't
that
got- we-
familiarity.
We haven't gotten Pete's take on these records.
We need to let him say something. Yeah, man.
No. This is monstrous. This is number one out of these three. This is really, really damn good, but not quite as good as that one. And this is a little bit different production style, really good songs. I agree. Some of the instrumental stuff meanders just a little bit, but it's the lesser of the three, but still really, really good. And I'm going to answer the songs thing, since Lewis pulled a Catino and gave all sorts of answers for his. Someone had to do it, right? I'm going to go with Thelahunjichi from this album. Uh, I kind of want to say Requiem, but Neil and Jack and Me is terrific.
There
I'm
you
gonna go
go.
with Neil and Jack and Me. And then from this, I think the title track is just spectacular. I love Neil and Jack and Me. I mean, Three of a Perfect Pair. I think it's just a really good, catchy song. I mean, that in a perfect world, Three of a Perfect Pair is a hit single in this country. But of course,
It's a great tune.
yeah, it really
It
is.
also has great lyrics. I mean, that's another thing that we didn't discuss, because I know that you guys don't care about the lyrics, but these three albums all have great fucking lyrics.
I got a dumb question. My Discipline doesn't come with lyrics. Does your CDs do they come with lyrics?
Let's see. I
Oh,
got
I don't think so.
one of the many million remasters. Let's see.
I don't think there's lyrics in this. No, it's all.
Pete
No,
has lyrics.
No lyrics in mine.
And
I get-
yeah, it's
Yeah,
kinda-
nothing.
by the
Well,
way,
No lyrics.
first British pressing. Beautiful.
Well, there you go. But nowadays, thanks to the wizardry of the internet, you can Google this shit.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean,
If you never figured them out through the years, you can look them up, and they're great. They have that thing where sometimes Blue is like almost impressionistic. It's very simple ideas, and it's just a kind of a John Lennonite vibe of just the musicality of the sound of the words. But at other times he's actually telling a complicated story with very few words, as in the title track of Three of a Perfect Pair. And I think these records are phenomenal for that reason. They give you more. The more you dig into them, they keep rewarding your time. I love it when records do that, because, well, we've said this before. If the lyrics don't matter, why the fuck do you have them in the first place? Just sing out your shopping list and be done, right? But I think they do matter, and if they don't matter, but you then say good shit and still with a good melody, even better. So,
For sure. For sure.
Raise your hand if you're disappointed that Adrian is not playing the Strat on this tour.
We've been talking about this in the chat.
How do you know though, Ken?
Because I saw,
I sent that picture. He's got the Mustang. I don't know about the Strat.
because I actually watched one of the interviews that was on YouTube, and he didn't want to take it out on tour. I think it's too valuable or something.
Just a stage prop then?
It is too
Yeah,
valuable.
He didn't want it. He didn't want
You know,
risking it.
Look, after a while,
Why do you have such a bug about the Parker? You really think it
Because
sounds
it-
that much inferior?
Yeah,
No.
and I think that
Don't hear it.
he completely changed the way he plays guitar versus the way he plays the Strat. Watch the videos, and you'll see him play. And I mean, the way with the Strat, the way he used the whammy bar, and he would use the amp for feedback. He's doing it all now through effects pedals and stuff. Just doesn't sound the same to me. So the shit that he used to do with that Strat was jaw dropping. It was crazy. Nobody was doing shit like that. Hendrix wasn't doing shit like that. And
Yeah, but do you really think he's going to compromise his style and sound?
it'll sound great, but
Yeah.
it's not the same. It's just not the same.
Is Vi using Ibanez's for this? Did you notice, Eric?
Vi has a
I
special.
saw the gem. He's got the
Yeah,
on
it's good.
one or two clips I watched. That's what he
Oh,
was.
but Ibanez made a special guitar for him for this,
Just for this.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
so he could tune it in the Fripp tuning, and it would be just right for the tension, the way he likes it, and all that.
It's
But
going to be great.
I will say this about Ken's thing with the Parker. This is a bug I have with a lot of prog fans when it comes to mellotrons versus sampled mellotrons.
Mhm.
There is something undeniably cool about watching an old piece of furniture be hauled into a stage, and it makes the sound, even if it's out of tune, even if it's a pain in the ass, like Chad will tell you with the mellotrons of Anglagard, because they had 3 of the fucking things, not just once.
Right.
It was the headache cubed, right? Fine. The thing with Adrian, and this is true, and I will give Ken props about this. The instrument controls how you play. So the weight of the Strat, the radius of the arm, the positioning of the switches and the volume controls and the tone, the bar, everything changes how you attack the instrument, without a doubt. However, we're talking about Adrian Belew, not a 3-fingered schmuck that plays covers in a bar. So when Adrian Belew grabs a Parker, he's doing 2 things. First of all, he's protecting his backbone. Now, I'm not saying that a Strat is super heavy. I'm saying if you've been carrying a fucking Strat for 50 years, yeah, get the Parker. That's number 1. Number 2, the Parker stays in tune,
Mhm.
which is the problem that he had with the other one. He was doing lots of crazy stuff, but it would go in and out of tune. The Parker stays in tune. So the touch is different. And he does do a lot of things with pedals that he used to do before with the amp. So the feedback and all that is different. But he also does things now that he could have never done in the old days with that rig. So he is also trying to keep himself interested, I think. If you're trying to keep doing new things, sometimes the toys work. Sometimes the innovations are good. I'm not saying they're good every time, but I've seen Adrian Belew play the Parker. I've seen him play a Strat-like instrument with King Crimson many years ago. And
I saw Adrian play both, and I also saw him play both last year with
Remain in Light, right?
I saw him with Jerry Harrison, and he was playing both.
So the way that I see it is, I'm with Eric. I don't hear the thing that bugs you. I think it's more like a nostalgia. He's not as visceral with the instrument in his hand with a Parker. Because it's have you ever held a Parker? It's almost like not there. It's very, very light. So that changes. I don't know if he starts to savage it like the Strat. A Strat is a weapon, right? You can use that and crack it over someone's head and it won't break. The Parker, if you just try to bend the neck the way he did with the Strat, you might snap it. So you have to treat it a little bit differently, I think. So I don't really hear the difference in the sound that you hear, Ken, but I will not deny that he's playing it with a lot more finesse. But my view is the instrument requires that.
He is a master technician. I
Absolutely.
absolutely
doubt.
agree, but he approaches it differently,
Mhm.
and he gets different sounds out of the setups. And to me, for the authenticity, I prefer the Strat.
You know what would be really good? This would be an excellent thing. If we ever get a chance, I would love to do this with Adrian, where we do an A/B. You know how you can always spot the fraud from the real deal with wine? All
Mhm.
these guys that pretend to be like wine connoisseurs, like they're all awesome until you throw up the fucking blindfold and they have to choose out of a glass. Right? It would be interesting, I think, because if we could just do like an A/B test, have Adrian from his home in Nashville play the Strat and play the Parker, and we would have to choose without seeing him do it, which is which.
Pete, make it happen. You have pull.
Because I think
Oh,
See what I can do, guys.
Oh, you know, Pete.
I think there is no difference in sound. I'm with Eric. I think he can do it all, but the visual aspect of it, which is important in the show, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it isn't. That has changed, but the sounds, I don't hear it.
We'll see. I think it'll be interesting when we all go see this tour live. When we do the tour, the gig review, we can kind of talk about how his tone sounded on stage and if it was as like we remembered it, and what we think of the whole Parker Fly thing. But that'll be coming up in over the next whole month or so, all right? Because we've got Beat coming around everybody's towns fairly quickly. So
When are
we'll
you guys going? When are you seeing?
I think it's the 24th of October.
something like that.
Chad, what are we? October 6th?
That's what I'm looking up. I think that's right.
It's October 6th. It's
Okay.
coming up.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
Sunday.
End of October, around right
that's
after we see ours, we'll get back together and we'll give a review of both shows and we'll see what we think. So between now and then, though, for everybody watching, let us know what you think of these three albums down in the comments below. Of course, the early '80s incarnation of King Crimson, Robert Fripp, Adrian Belew, Tony Levin, and Mr. Bill Bruford, Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair. And we'll see you next time here on In the Prog Seat. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together.
All
the
the
time.
Time.
See you next time on In the Prog Seat for Eric Porter, Ken Golden, Chad Hutchinson, and Luis Nasser. I'm Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. It's all about Beat and King Crimson here today. See you next time on In the Prog Seat. Take care.